Welcome everyone. Please let me know if you can hear me. Otherwise, I might have to fiddle on some settings real quick. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to another Casual Stroll live stream. We're going through Eastern Rohan, the East Marches of Rohan this time around. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. I'm a senior world designer for Lord of the Rings Online, and I've been doing this for a very long time. And I'm excited to bring to you an exploration of the world of Middle-earth. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with what this stream is, this is a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online, where I take a region as voted by the players to just do an exploration of, talk about the world building process, the level design process, how we do our research and whatnot to build all of these regions that you all get to play in. As is the case with every single other stream that I've done, this is a world and level design focused stream. If you have questions regarding things like PvMP, instance content, things like skills, classes, even some of the details about the quests themselves, I'm not really going to be able to answer those questions for you because they're not my area of expertise. I am a world designer and level designer. But if you have questions about how we build the landscapes, what goes into building them, how we research everything, I'm certainly happy to help and answer what questions I can. I also, housing is kind of my pet baby project. So if you have any questions about housing, feel free to ask those as well. So where we left off, one of our last streams, we explored through the Great River region, which is right behind me, and we're kind of picking up where we left off there. Conveniently, the region after Great River that was voted on next was Eastern Rohan. So here we are, right at the start of Eastern Rohan, getting ready to explore and go in through here. One of the things that we really wanted to do at the start of Eastern Rohan was, kind of harken back to things that we had done back in the original launch of the game. We wanted to have a world change experience. We hadn't really done that in a very long time, and we wanted to use Rohan as an opportunity to do that. And we employed that through the first town that we're going to come across here very shortly. One of the things that was a lot of fun building this region is it's kind of one of the first, biggest, broadest, most open regions that we've ever really built before. And it's expansive, at least by the standards of the time that we built it. I think Swanfleet and Cardalon kind of butt up against it in terms of expansiveness and open space. But Rohan at the time was kind of one of the biggest places that we had ever built. So we'll go up here and we'll take this out. You get these great views here. Now you can see here to the west. Originally this was just a region impassable, or cliff face. But as we continued to grow the game, and in between the release, between the launch of Eastern Rohan and Western Rohan, we did introduce the area of Wildermoor, which is kind of the frosty, frozen north of Rohan, but not naturally frozen north. I suppose you could call it one of our earlier filling in the gaps spaces. So welcome to Langhold. This is, and I apologize in advance for anyone that may not have experienced this, but this is kind of the experience this yet. But this is the setting of the world change that occurs here. Through the storyline of Langhold, you kind of get to experience its fall, and right now it seems like a normal, happy village, but we were really excited to kind of go into it with the idea of okay, we're going to change this village, we're going to change this town. And really I think some of these ideas that we did here kind of got pushed into Hitbolt as part of the endgame activity for Rohan. That poor salamander. One of the other things too that we introduced as part of Rohan was the idea of war bands, which are these, not necessarily rare monsters, but larger encounters that, um, that can be more difficult, more challenging, that roamed a greater range of space than most enemies usually did. And our first encounters here with that are meant to be here with Cinder. You kind of wander in, and there is this, UI notifier, and you'll get your quest pop up and let you know that you're coming up against a sort of enemy that you've never really engaged with before. And I think tracking it on the radar was something new for us in that way as well. So we'll do a quick look at some of these questions before going further down into Rohan. Let's see. Oh, also, if you haven't seen me have a drink in a while, please remind me to have a drink. I've got my ginger ale and I've got my water, so keep me hydrated. So let's see. We've got Anorels saying Casual Stroll runs at Mach 3. Well, I feel like if I were to actually casually stroll through some of these regions, we would be here for 4 or 5 hours, and I'm sure you would all appreciate that. But I have King's Gondor and areas beyond that to work on for later this year, so I don't necessarily have the time to devote to all of that. Let's see. So Stars and Rangers asks, did the War Steeds have a lot of impact on how things were organized on landscape? Yes, they did. Because the idea of mounted combat was both meaning that the creatures or the characters were going to be moving across the landscape at a faster rate than they ever had before, but we also needed to make sure that things were loading appropriately for that speed. We had to make some changes to how we built the landscape. Normally we would have things like lots of rocks and other like physical impediments on the landscape, and those are a little frustrating, especially when you're trying to learn how to control your war steed for the first time. So a lot of the landscape design, the scenery assets that we're using, we tried not to have a ton of things that you would just kind of like bump into and get stuck on as you're running around on the landscape on your war steeds. We also had to change the way in which our servers kind of managed certain pieces of landscape as you were running. Like I think if I recall right, we had to flag land blocks as war steed capable land blocks, so that the server knows to like handle them a little bit differently, so that things can like load out a little bit further. And on top of that, adding in things like the war bands. When you add in war bands that can roam greater distances than before, we had to have a way to make sure that we could have all of the land blocks that a war band was moving around on loaded as well. I always love these little outposts here defending along the Anduin. These were just like a nice, fun little addition. And one of these days we will expand and build out the Brownlands a bit more. But I do like the horizon line that we have going on here. That feels good. So let's see, a couple more questions. People saying that I'm not on a war steed running around. It's like, who needs a war steed when I have run 3? Alright, let's see. Langhold, the village that breaks all our hearts first thing. Yep, we got to twist that knife to get you invested. Let's see. Menegroth says, any chance we can see the banners of Gil-galad from the old reward track be added to something like Curator in the future? Unfortunately, that's not a question that I can really answer. I don't typically dabble in rewards outside of housing rewards. Might be something worthwhile posting as a request on the message boards, though. Soft Snake GR says, we noticed in U35 you changed the last only house. Can you please bring back the reflected floor? And why do you always put so many assets inside buildings and not keep the minimal aesthetic that helps players breathe in a space? So, as far as the reflective floor goes, that's certainly something that we can toss to the designer who built the space to see if it actually works in the space. I don't know the specifics of why that may or may not have been kept. There may be development reasons for it. I don't know. I was not responsible for the space, so I can't answer that specifically. As far as adding additional deco for the space, I think there's certainly something to be said for some spaces having simplicity to them. I think in a place like the Last Homely House, and I think we're going to end up disagreeing on this point. I think something like the Last Homely House, which is for all intents and purposes the capital, the main castle, the main holding of the elves in the West, it makes sense that it feels a bit more busy and a bit more full and a bit more decorated than it used to be. I think the way it originally looked was in large part a byproduct of the restrictions that we had with the way we were building this space originally. And because of that, we didn't have the flexibility to do things in the way that we do now and that we're doing as part of this revamp. The other thing that's nice about this revamp is it does give us a good, solid, modular set of pieces that we can potentially use for building other new quest interiors, new social interiors, potentially even housing interiors which we didn't have previously, which I think really is really great and really beneficial for us from a production standpoint, because like I said, we didn't really have those things available to us until this was introduced. I do love this whole area here, this ridge. It just feels wild and out there to me, which just there's something that's nice about it. And then you get these great sunsets. At some point, I'm going to have to change the time of day again, because it's going to get dark soon. Lost Shire Hobbit says, what was the most exciting thing about building Rohan? It's possibly... excuse me. I think the most exciting thing for me was playing around in these kinds of broad, big, open landscapes, and it's something that we had come off building Moria and honestly Lothlorien to an extent too. These very somewhat claustrophobic feeling spaces. Lothlorien feels very closed in. Mirkwood is very closed in. So coming to these areas and building these areas was just kind of a breath of fresh air. I spent a lot of time working towards these goals while other people were working on things like Enedwaith and Dunland. So having that kind of breath of fresh air, and I think that's a position that we often have after we've kind of been in a similar kind of space for a while. I think people were after Gondor and Mordor, the design team was really looking forward to having that breath of fresh air that eventually came with the Dale Lands, and then moving on into building Ironfold and the Grey Mountains, which are these kind of more broader open spaces. And then we kind of went back to gloomy and dark and evil with Minas Morgul, and then Gundabad, and then taking this year after Gundabad to build Swanfleet and Cardolan and expand on the Yondershire. So it's we have this cadence of we really like these rich, thematic, heavy spaces, but these kinds of spaces can be so heavy that you actually need a break from them So having that break is always just like much desired, much sought after, both from the player perspective and from our perspective. I think we try to find a way to balance like the darkness of a space with some breathers here and there. Let's see. So Yao, hold on, let me look through some more of these things. So Yao says, you mentioned that Rohan housing was something you were aiming to bring to East Rohan before it got introduced. Did you have any places in mind for East Rohan housing? So actually, our original plan was we had two ideas for Rohan housing. One of which was, let's go this way. Um, One of the plans was to um, build it in Western Rohan, but have access to it from Eastern Rohan. And I think we had some fairly early prototypey stuff in there with that. And then one of our other plans was to have it just kind of be floating off in its own little bubble somewhere, and you just kind of think like, oh, you have to teleport in, and Rohan is so expansive that it's like feasible. Kind of like how we did with Westmead, where it's like off in its own little space, but it's still considered part of the Shire, like that sort of thing. And I think that was kind of the direction we were originally leaning with Rohan housing. Um, I think the original hope was to introduce Rohan housing as, let me turn off the UI, to introduce Rohan housing as a kinship housing system, but because we'd need some additional support on the engineering side of things to build kinship neighborhoods, didn't really end up happening. Um, there are remnants of it floating here and there. We have some old in development file names and whatnot that still reference it. There's some old hook types that still reference things like kinship housing, but and I think old telepads to areas that have long since been wiped out. But yeah, so that's kind of where we were originally thinking. Plans change, so. Uh, So let's see if where I can get some more questions. So Softsnake GR says, I really like the Rohan regions. Two things: I don't like the wall of cliffs that discourage one more from being an open space along with the rest of Rohan, and the huge housing block in the middle of Rohan that ruins 100% of the immersion of not only Rohan but the whole LOTRO experience. So I think Kingstead housing, and that's something we can talk more about when we get to Rohan, is kind of an experiment to see if we can put a housing neighborhood in an existing space as opposed to having it be off in a bubble. And one of the goals eventually is to be able to get some testing in to see how the game acts if we have a housing space overlap with a public space. And if the testing for that goes well, then we'll be able to tear down the invisible walls, at least on the public side of things. Tear down those invisible walls and open it up. So that should help kind of reduce some of the hemmed-in feeling of everything. But we have other things that we want to focus engineering priority on right now, and I'm sure I don't need to mention what those things are. So until those things kind of we finalize and finish our efforts on those things, don't think we'll be moving forward on that kind of testing right away. So let's see. True Paltrax says, from Rohan you see milestones hidden within objects like fountains and monuments. Is this something that you could be added to older content? I'm not sure what that means. If you mean there are like motifs and whatnot that are hidden in some of those items, some of those decorative pieces that could be backported in some way. if that's what you mean, like I think whenever we create new assets, there's always an interest, particularly when we're creating new assets for cultures, new cultural assets. We try to find ways to bring those motifs in. Um, so yeah, that's just my way of saying, like, whenever we have an opportunity to do something new like that, we will find an opportunity to do something like that. Let's see. So I know I can go up Amun Hen as a player. Is Amun La accessible with super jump abilities? I can certainly get myself up there. Um, if folks would like, while we are here, and I'll just... apologies to anyone that's on board right now, all of a sudden seeing stuff exploding around them. That's just me rocket jumping all over the place. I know the content designers had a lot of fun building the quests for kind of retelling the path of the Fellowship through here, and also like telling the stories of the surrogate Fellowship that the players kind of end up joining as they explore through the region. You know, Corridan and Horn and whatnot. Looking at it, this makes me feel like it might not be a bad idea for us to try to import in some of the Gondor region landscape into this so that we can see things better in the distance. All right. Well, we have the view. Let's see if there are a few more questions. All right. Nothing. What a great view up there. Yeah, this is, I think, where Lord of the Rings is certainly has some great strengths. Is our open world views. All right, so we'll take a quick little detour and see if we can get up there. I don't actually know how much of what has been built over here. Because this is only ever really meant to be a facade. So yeah, you can see there's no physics on this. So this is really just a facade, but it's physical, but for the most part. All right, so Schmooze asks, "Are you ever going to redo the old cinematics of the book quests? They look horrible, to be honest." That's not something that I can really speak to, though I don't believe we really have anything specific for that on our docket. So. Do. So one of the things, I see a few people here talking about the look and feel of the skyboxes. Whoa. The look and feel of the skyboxes and whatnot. I'm getting into places that I shouldn't be for this tour, so let's just rocket jump ourselves back up here. There we go. Bop. That's something that when we built the game originally, there was a lot of emphasis put onto figuring out how we can kind of like layer off the skyboxes and make it something where we have a ton of flexibility to do interesting colors and changes and things with the clouds. Like our clouds, for example, are um, I think 3 different layers that we can each kind of control the colors on independently depending on the time of day, so that if we want to have like, bright white upper highlights but then really really dark under highlights, underneath it, like it's it's something that like we really focused a lot of time and effort and energy on. I think that was something that one of our world designers along with the art team like spent easily a month just on figuring out and prototyping clouds. And we have a few different types of clouds out there. We've got just like the flat scrolly cloud, which is good for overcast stuff. We've got these clouds here, which were a result of all of that prototyping and R&D. But after 15 years, you kind of want a little diversity. So then we have the Rohan stuff, and I think one of the things that we're really kind of interested in doing for the expansion pack and for what we're working on over the course of the year is looking into other new skyboxes that can be created. Other new things to make the sky interesting, appealing. And one of the things I would really love to do, and this is still like one of my favorite visual effects games that are fairly old games, but like I remember being blown away playing Asheron's Call for 2 for the first time and standing up on a mountain and looking out over the valley beneath it and seeing the shadows being cast across the landscape by the clouds. And if there was any way I could try to get that feature back into LOTRO, like I would love that, because I think with what we're building right now, there's just such a great opportunity for like say you're standing here, and this isn't a great example, but if you were up on this hill and you were just looking out over everything and you could see the clouds like rolling across the hills, projecting across the shadows across the hills, like I think that would just be such a great effect and would just add a little bit more to the look and feel of it being a real world. Yeah, so that's something that I'm hoping to push for, but I can't make any guarantees that I'll actually get. East Rohan. All right, so what was that? Was it just an enemy falling from the sky? Maybe. What's going on? Why is my shadow doing weird things? So we got I think this is an endgame repeatable instance space. Maybe at some point this could be opened up. We don't have a lot of quarries in game, so having more quarries could be interesting. Druid's Fire says, unrelated question, are you going to be at the Pack Player meetup at PAX next month? Potentially. I have friends and whatnot that are visiting from the area and also have a young daughter, so it really depends on what's going on that weekend with friends and family as to whether or not I'll be in attendance. So Ranatur says, we just need to make a list of all the places we can get to and ask Scenario to go to them. And if they happen to overlap with where we're casually strolling, I think one of the components of this, which unfortunately East Rohan does not have a ton of, is going through and checking out the like R&D spaces that we've built that have either been left unused or have been abandoned. Like I think there's certainly like interest and value in seeing some of that stuff. Soft Snake GR says East Rohan was the first region with frills. I'm guessing you're being facetious about this, but certainly frills are a stock component of everywhere. I think we wanted to lean into them a little bit more here in Rohan, just because we couldn't really lean into lean into much else. Like, there's not much for trees, there's not much for rocks, so it's really like a lot of bushes and grass to make the landscape feel a bit more interesting. And I mean, Rohan is like plains, it's grasslands, it's rolling hills. Like, frills are going to be a major component to that. So here we are at Hitbolt. This is a great, like, it's a grind, but it was really interesting. It's really interesting, even just like spending a little bit of time in here, playing through the stuff in here, and doing some of the cosmetic advancements through this region, through this area. Um, I, having looked at it under the hood, like, there is a lot of work. There's a great spreadsheet that a player created that like talks through all of the like reward points and timing, how much time it would take you to do everything in here, and like I like building that spreadsheet alone from the player outward perspective is a lot of work. I can't imagine the like spreadsheets and headaches of the designer who originally implemented it, bringing it all together, because yeah, there's so many just different directions of rebuild that happen here. The frustrating thing is, because it's all phasing, it's only in looks only. There's no actual changes to the physics of the space, um, which is unfortunate. But that that's the limitation of the phasing system, sadly. Um, Druid's Fire says, feature request for Umbar, a skybox that illustrates where the stars are strange. Don't make Corey cry if they're the same constellations. I think we have that in mind, and it's certainly something that we're aware of anywhere that we go. We change up the sky as we need to. Certain constellations come in, certain constellations leave. I know we've done some skyboxes that have had certain heavenly bodies in the sky because the story needed them to be there. So we've done that in instances. Shmooze says, are you looking into a new tree look? I think the trees are one of the assets that take you out of the immersion the most. Um, so I think there are a couple things. I think with Swanfoot and Cardelon, we got a great new set of rocks that I think look fantastic, and we're definitely getting a lot of use out of them. Um, we just started playing around with them with Cardaswan, and I think we've got even more to do with them in what we're doing for Update 36 and Update 38. I think the state of some of the original trees, particularly our old deciduous trees, are something that's very much on the mind of our art team, especially as we look towards doing art revamps here and there. So I think it would not be surprising to me if at some point certain trees get updated to look better. Just as to when, I'm not sure. That's more something that's kind of an art pipeline, figure it out kind of thing. And then, new regions, if it makes sense for us to have new trees, I think where we're going for Update 36 does not necessarily need new trees, but it will certainly be utilizing trees that haven't gotten a lot of use in the past, and will kind of be avoiding the shape forms of the old style deciduous trees, certainly. As I've been digging through what we're going to be using for those scene files in the area, there are some trees that honestly, like, we use in one area of the game and we don't use anywhere else, and we could certainly find a use for them in other locations. So I think it's something that's on our mind. Oh, this poor guy. we're gonna help him out. There. Saved a life. All right. So we'll go down through some more questions once I get us a good view of Drake Pride Rock over there. That works for me. Let's see. Grand Ridis says, well, the two quarries in Far Norien are astounding. Yeah, they honestly, they were part of the inspiration for something that I'm working on for Update 36. So there's going to be another quarry in Update 36, which I'm excited for, because I don't think I've built a quarry since working in Scary back in the Shire. I think that I don't think I've built anything like that since then. So. Let's see. Yao says we need a new Hitbolt experience somewhere in game, and I think, you know, I have in my head an idea for a housing system that is kind of sort of Hitbolt. I know a lot of people kind of had hopes and dreams of Rohan housing being that. There we go. You know, I think people were kind of hoping to have like a Hitbolt-like experience in Rohan housing. That really wasn't our intention and goal with that with those areas. But you know, certainly having heard that from players when Hitbolt was released, it's something that I look at now as, you know, I have the specs built. I've been working with Orion on them. We kind of have this long game of, you know, where we want to eventually be with housing, what kind of systems we want to incorporate with it, how can we introduce, you know, more gameplay into housing. So those are all things that can have those kind of Hitbolt-like experiences to them. You know, I think we just need to like iterate and whatnot. I think like housing in general is very much an iterative system where, you know, each new housing offering that we have, we kind of think of it in terms of, okay, what additional piece of the puzzle are we adding onto all of this, you know, so that sort of thing. And you know, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we could do with the system. We just need a little bit of time to iron out the systems, time to iron out the engineering needs, like all of that stuff, to make something that is that kind of impactful advancement system. Stars and Rangers asks, can the Beacon of Eworth be climbed in one big jump? Else, if you'd like a more landscapey question, what was the approach to incorporating various bygone civilizations, New Barrows, Gondor, into the region? So, you know, I think with the Draugr, who are the whites in here, you know, there was research done into kind of the folklores and whatnot of the peoples that the Rohirrim were patterned after, and trying to find a way to integrate things like whites and spirits into into the region, and in a way that made sense, the way that worked thematically. And the Draugr were kind of how that occurred. As far as introducing things like Gondorian architecture and whatnot, well, you know, like there are those influences in the region already. There are ruins that exist. So I think having them scattered here and there throughout the region was not really something we felt needed a lot of like effort to justify. You know, like actually can see one right here. You know, there's Snowborn, which, like, per lore, Snowborn says, like, this is kind of what it was built out of, you know, what it was built around. let's see. Any chance of fixing the upside down moon or adding phases? Always a possibility, not something that's right on our radar right now. If the upside down moon is a bug, I'm not sure I'm aware of it, but feel free to submit a bug on that so that we can have our people look at it. As a fan of Tolkien and not dev, where would you live in Middle Earth? Can be any area from game or books. Where would I live? I mean, I myself am, I grew up in the mountains. I am a mountain kid. So anywhere that's kind of mountainous, and I think like my world building is often very influenced by the areas that I've lived, that I've grown up in. Um, so like I would probably lean into something mountainous. I love the Vales of Anduin and the Wells of Anduin, and I like just the, you know, I like the ruggedness of those areas, and those feel good to me. So I'd probably live in one of those spaces. Um, Airnell says there's still lots of super shiny reflective tree bugs to squash, especially in areas like Bree. Again, whenever you come across a bug in game, I highly encourage you to um, make a post about it through our bug submission form that ensures that it gets into our queue. Um, I'm not always looking at the message boards. I'm not always able to respond to things. I'm a member of a couple of different Discord communities, but again, like the most reliable way to help us get those bugs fixed is if you submit a bug. Submitting a bug gets it into our system. It may not be something that is fixed immediately. It may not be something that is, um, you know, shows up in game for months, or even could even take a year, depending on where our priorities are, what we're working on, how the how the bug gets through the queue and whatnot. But at least by submitting it, it ensures that it gets in the system, and that's the most important thing, is getting it in the system. All right, let's see. Is there any story left or region for Rohan to be in LOTRO's future updates apart from weddings and funerals? Um, I think there are weddings and funerals, certainly, but there's also just opportunities then for us to tell other stories, new stories, if we wanted to. I think if we ever came back to the whole filling in the gaps year, or updates, areas surrounding Rohan may be potential candidates for that. I think Rohan itself is pretty filled in, so we don't really have the Swiss cheese landscape experience that some of the elder regions had. Rohan is a big open left to right space, um, but yeah, I think any content designer, quest designer could find some other new stories to tell in Rohan, um, if they so desired. Let's see. We'll get you this view, and then I'll read through some more of the questions. Can you explain why some faces look really good and some look really bugged or distorted? Um, I can't necessarily explain any of those things. Some of it, I'm sure, has to do with when the asset itself was created. Depends on how old the asset is. Depends on what the budget for those assets are. Um, I know, like, certainly some of our older NPC art is old NPC art, and certainly something that could stand to be updated. That's about the extent of it. Old art is old. Um, so let's see. A few. few more questions here. It's been broken forever. So this is furthermore about the moon. It's been broken forever, the upside down moon, but this is Middle Earth. The significance of the moon in lore is huge. Many, many bugs, no news at all. Yes, but feel free to report said bugs, because if they're reported, then potentially we can address them. Alright, let's see. It's in the same category as entering the warp animation and broken forever. Alright. So we will continue on our journey through here. I think one of the things that was really an interesting challenge for us and kind of a test for us as we were building this was, we weren't going to be building Western Rohan outside of the far terrain as we were working on this. So we needed to have a way to we needed to have a way to keep people in the bounds of the space. And this was one of the areas where we were really kind of testing the concept of using things like bushes and reeds and whatnot as our region impassables. And I think it worked generally well. I kind of took some of that as inspiration for when I redid Archit, and I think it worked well enough. Granted, now that Western Rohan is open, we don't need those impassables, but there's certainly something that, as we were making it, we're like, okay, how do we keep people out here? We don't want to put fences up the whole way, sort of thing. Like this used to be all blocked off with things like rocks and bushes, and it no longer is. Looking at these cliffs, there's a great desire, though the reality is I probably won't be able to do it, but to go in and do like a rock placement pass with our new rocks in here. But I have other bigger things to build, like housing neighborhoods and new regions. Right, we'll dip our toes into Fangorn as well. Bloop. Now entering the eaves of Fangorn. So I don't know that I'll have actually enough time to get to any of the dungeon interiors that are through here. Like Rohan had a ton of them. We had lots of little social interiors. We had lots of just different endgame instance spaces, for Hitbolt and whatnot. One of the things that I appreciate running through here is that we resisted the urge to make the forest super, super dark. Like, this feels about like the right level of darkness. I know it's the eaves. It's not the deepest, darkest section of the forest, but it's still nice to be able to see where you're going. And I think that's one of the things that we could work on in Northern Mirkwood is is not having things be so super dark that you really can't see anything. Like, at the very least, you want to be able to see silhouettes of where you are and what's going. The nice thing about Fangorn is, this kind of became our template for how to build dense forests. And I cribbed the Fangorn scene files when it came time to revamp the Old Forest. I think this scene file does a great job of being confusing, but still being open. Being confusing, but not hemming you in with weird walls everywhere and whatnot. You can't go exactly where you want to go because you can't get that clear line of sight in front of you like you can get in other places. I think the use of the fog in here really helps to highlight the silhouettes and highlight the shifts in change in terrain. So yeah, I think overall this is one of our most successful forests. Yeah, I think the only thing I might do is get rid of some of these little saplings, because the reality is, in like dense forests like this, the big trees like crowd out and kill any other trees around it that might be trying to grow up. But we are now back out in the open landscape, and we're gonna start heading our way down the Entwash. So Laren says, Sev alluded to it in December, subsurface scattering. What percent is being considered as Lighting 2.0 update? So I think we're always looking at and thinking about new ways, new rendering techniques, new things that we can bring into LOTRO to help make it look better considering its age. I think our first step with that was with the per pixel lighting, and yes, it has some side effects that we are like kind of working through the log on cleaning up on as we discover them, as you discover them. There are little things here and there that need to be fixed. I know there are some new features that are coming in for how light and shadow interact with water. I'm not sure if they're in this build. They're probably in this build. But having things like shadows be able to cast on water surfaces and also underneath water surfaces, just to kind of make things look and feel a little bit better. We've brought back soft edge water. As far as like lighting engines go, like I think there are certainly ideas and techniques that our tech team has been thinking about and has been interested in pursuing. It's just a matter of, like so many other things, the time to do that. I think this is going to take a couple leaps. No, maybe just one. One jump. I think someone had asked about that earlier. All right, so we're continuing on down the Entwash. Honestly, like I do kind of have fond memories of working on this river, and some of it is the like challenge and interest in like how do we use it as an impassable. Certainly looking at it now, like these cliffs, we could smooth these out. There's no reason really for these to be here, at least in that form. Um, but like there's something like kind of like relaxing and satisfying about building waterfalls and doing the water flow for an area. That's something that when we were building Cardaswan, like there was a lot of work put into that there too. Um, keep on heading. We're not almost to Snowborn, but we're getting there. So one of the things too that we've been doing is going through as we found them. Found them as the weird like shared um, appearance issues. Like every so often you'll be in one area, then you'll teleport to another area, and all of a sudden things like the rocks or the trees change the appearance to look like the area that you just came from. And some of that is because we made changes to commonly used assets so that as far as rendering goes, they wouldn't have as much of a render hit on them, so that instead of like each individual rock, for example, being a unique render pass, they're all instead, a rock of a certain type is a shared render experience. So, so that, the client is a little bit happier. Um, the side effect of that is because they're all shared now, that means their appearances are shared, and we need to make new versions of those assets with the appearances baked onto them, and then do a replacement. And because of how big the world is, it's kind of a piecemeal project where we hear about or we see on the message boards, oh hey, this issue here. So then we go through that area that's reported, and handle all of that in that one area. I know Snowborn had that issue where I think some of the houses and some of the Gondorian walls were changing texture. I don't remember if we fixed it for this update, but it's certainly something that we have noted in a bug somewhere. All right, let's see. Find ourselves a good view and go through a few more questions. I don't think I'm going to try to get to any of the dungeons today, because there's a lot of them, unfortunately. So, and I've got an hour, and then I've got to jump into other meetings. So there was a question, how many members are on the dev team? That's not my place to talk about. That is more of a business level conversation, and is not something that I really should talk about. I'm sure there are other people that can. I'm just not, me personally, I'm just not ready or willing or comfortable to talk about those kinds of numbers. Do I have a favorite waterfall? I mean, I really enjoyed I really like the waterfalls that I built in the Ramduath. When I went through the Ramduath and Angmar and did an update to those things, my monitor shut off. When I did those waterfalls there, coming off of the high cliffs, that was really fun and satisfying to look at. And yes, waterfalls, the waterfall assets we have right now, they're not super great, at least on the top side of them. And I think a lot of them were kind of built with the thought and expectation that they would be more on the edges of impassables or in places that you couldn't get to really. And we've since used them in many other different ways. I know regularly we get requests from designers wanting to put things behind waterfalls, and it's not always easy as just putting a cave behind it. So Ponton Finberry says, mention cloud shadows earlier moving across the land. Is there any possibility of landscape shadows could ever move? I feel like they stay in the same position regardless of where the sun is. Yes. So typically, we do not have the sun move, or we do not have the light source in the world move with the sun in the world. And some of that's because we want to avoid weird artifacts. If the light moves into a weird spot, and now all of a sudden the light is casting up through the landscape, what does that do? Okay, so the light moves here, and now it's at a point where it needs to change position. So now players are going to see a very harsh switch when it goes from 11:59 to 1 a.m. So we don't usually have the light move. We also still support old landscape shadow methods. So while in general, when you're playing the game, if you're just an average player who's not really trying to tune for performance or not running on a older system, a really old system, you'll have the DX10 dynamic lights. But we still have support for the old static shadow systems that came from DX9. And those are stencil shadows. They don't really move, they're not supposed to move, and they can look really weird if they do start moving. If that system ever gets sunset, we might have a bit more flexibility in how our light moves, but I wouldn't expect us to really have the light source for the world move in an appreciably dynamic way because of the weird artifacts that could occur because of it moving. Uh, so let's see. We'll wrap up these questions and then I'm going to call it a night. So Yao says, no visit to the Rohan test space we saw one time on the Cordovan stream. I'm not sure what test space that's in reference to. We did have an old Rohan housing test space, but that's really been demolished years ago. So I'm not sure what test space that's in reference to. Let's see. Are there any plans to make skirmish soldiers to level 140 so they're useful? Not my area of expertise. Can't answer that for you. Since the town of Bree is the main hub of the game, if you ever revisit it, can you make it seasonal? Example, in the winter you would have snow on the ground. So we don't usually do seasonal changes to landscape because the way we tell a story in our game is it is locked. Each zone is kind of locked in the time period that the stories are being told in. So it wouldn't necessarily make sense to have Breetown, which in general is locked around the time of when the hobbits arrive at the Prancing Pony. Like that's the Bree time period. So having it be seasonal means that that kind of time locking goes out of the way, goes out the window. We do have the opportunities to do things like copies and versions of those spaces for instances, like we do with the winter version of Breetown for Skirmish, but those are separate spaces and they're not normally accessible outside of that. Different games, different worlds can do those things, but the conceit of how we're narratively exploring the game locks each region generally in the time that it's set in, and any quests that happen in those spaces that are outside of that setting usually don't have an impact in the surroundings around them. All right. All right. So yeah, I think that covers it. We're a little bit over time, but I'm really glad that we got to explore Rohan. Even though we didn't go into any of the dungeon space, I've got a list of what is it? It's like there's like, and this is just a pared down list, but there's like 30-ish interiors that we could have gone into, but perhaps for another stream, maybe I'll do a Dungeons of Middle Earth stream where I pick, like, we could do a poll on everyone's favorite dungeon from each region, and then we could go down through that list. That might be an interesting thing for when we get through all the regions. So as for what's coming up next for us, so right now, Update 35 is on Bullroar. If you haven't had a chance, pop in. I think one of the instances is running in it now. We're going to be running Bullroars over the next several weeks until we're ready to launch Update 35. So rest assured, the other instances will be getting in there. We also have got class changes and revamps to other class or other character-focused systems. So you can jump in there and check those out. I'd fully expect at some point in the nearish future, well, probably within the next couple of months, few months, we'll be doing previews of what's coming up for Update 36, as well as previews for the next housing neighborhood. But yeah, I anticipate what our next region will be after this is going to be Western Rohan, just kind of following down through the rank order of how things were voted. So that was a somewhat predictable thing. But we are getting very close to being done with Ravanian, and at which point we'll move on to Gondor and Mordor and whatnot. So, anyways, thank you everyone. Thank you for hanging out here, asking your questions. Happy to have you here and answer what I could. Looking forward to seeing you all at the next stream sometime next month. So yeah, have a great afternoon, everyone. See you on Bullroar. Have a great day.